Hello. Today we're going to dive into the story of one of the most infamous cannibals in history. This is the tale of a man who was once known as a bright young boy with a love for poetry and classical music. But a tragic childhood twisted his fate, transforming him into one of Britain's most terrifying criminals. During his time in prison, instead of repenting, this killer became even more ruthless. He murdered 3 fellow inmates. And what stands out is that most of his victims were individuals with a history of child abuse. You won't believe that he once spent 9 hours torturing one of them to death. There were even rumors that he ate part of the victim's brain. His gruesome acts made him the nightmare of every prisoner, and his name was spoken in hushed tones of terror. For security reasons, British authorities had no choice but to isolate him in solitary confinement. As of today, he has spent 39 years in solitary, breaking the record for the longest period of solitary confinement in British history. So who is this notorious murderer? What kind of childhood did he endure that turned him into such a vengeful beast? And why does he harbor such deep hatred toward child abusers? In 1953, in the city of Liverpool, England, a boy named Robert Maudsley was born into a poverty-stricken family with a total of 13 children. With so many mouths to feed, his parents struggled to provide for them all. Unable to cope with the financial burden, they were forced to send several of their children to an orphanage, including Robert. At the orphanage, he was well taken care of by the nuns. But what Robert didn't realize was that those days in the orphanage would be the happiest and warmest moments of his entire life. When he was 8 years old, his parents unexpectedly took him back home. At that age, Robert longed for the love of his family, especially the gentle embrace of his mother and the kind gaze of his father. But what awaited him was far from what he had hoped for. Returning home marked the beginning of years filled with darkness and suffering. Robert's father was a short-tempered and violent man. Any minor mistake or trivial argument could trigger his rage, and he would take it out on his children. He beat them mercilessly with his fists, his belt, and sometimes even a thick wooden stick. Even worse, instead of protecting Robert, his mother joined in, subjecting him to both physical abuse and emotional neglect. Many times, Robert tried to shield his younger sisters from his father's brutal punishments, but his defiance only led to even more severe beatings. Every act of resistance only brought him harsher punishments. His childhood was a relentless cycle of fear and pain, devoid of any sense of safety or love. Beyond the physical abuse, Robert's father would often lock his children in a dark room as a cruel form of punishment. The long, cold nights spent alone in that room became traumatic memories that haunted him for the rest of his life. In the worst instance, Robert was locked in that room for 6 whole months. Fortunately, one of Robert's younger sisters, with her intelligence and bravery, decided to report the family's abuse to social services. Thanks to her courage, authorities intervened and rescued Robert from the hellish nightmare that was his home. After being removed from his biological family, Robert was placed in a foster home. He hoped that this would be his chance at peace, but reality proved otherwise. His life in foster care was even worse. At the age of 16, unable to endure the abuse any longer, Robert ran away and began living on the streets. Years of relentless violence had hardened his mind and twisted his psyche. As a homeless teenager, he quickly fell into drug addiction. To fund his addiction, he turned to sex work. It was during this time that Robert took his first steps down the dark path that would define the rest of his life. One time, Robert's client was a construction worker. After their transaction was over, the man didn't just boast arrogantly about his past acts of child abuse. He pulled out a series of photographs showing himself torturing children and proudly displayed them to Robert. At that moment, those images triggered the most painful memories of Robert's childhood. The beatings, the abuse, and the unbearable suffering he had endured as a child. In an instant, all the suppressed rage that had been simmering inside him exploded. Overcome with uncontrollable fury, Robert strangled the construction worker to death. From that moment on, he fully understood that he had become a murderer. After committing the crime, Robert didn't run. Instead, he walked straight into a police station and turned himself in. He was sentenced to life in prison and sent to serve his time behind bars. However, even in prison, it was impossible to suppress the monster inside him. He frequently suffered from severe mental instability, and eventually, authorities transferred him to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. But no one could have predicted that it was in this very hospital that Robert would commit the crime that would forever cement his name as one of the most terrifying figures in British history. When Robert first arrived at the psychiatric hospital, he appeared to be well-behaved and didn't cause any trouble. But in 1977, he set his sights on a man named David Francis. Robert's reason for targeting David was simple. He had discovered that David was a child abuser, something Robert despised with every fiber of his being. Consumed by uncontrollable hatred, he decided that he couldn't let David go unpunished. He even convinced another patient to join him in carrying out a murder. Together, they waited until David was taking his afternoon nap. They slipped into his room, barricaded the door with a wooden bed plank, and tied him up using cassette tape. Then, Robert and his accomplice began torturing him. The brutal session lasted for 9 straight hours. It wasn't until much later that the hospital staff and prison guards realized that something horrific had taken place. When the police broke into the room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Blood splattered everywhere, and David's skull had been split open. Robert sat calmly next to the corpse, holding a spoon covered in blood. This chilling detail soon led to rumors that Robert had eaten part of David's brain. While no solid evidence ever confirmed the claim, the sheer brutality of the murder made it a widely discussed topic, drawing massive media attention. From that moment on, Robert was branded with a new name, the Cannibal. Following the incident, he was convicted of another murder charge and transferred to Wakefield Prison, also known as Monster Mansion, the most secure prison in Britain. This facility was reserved for the country's most dangerous criminals, including death row inmates and those guilty of the most heinous crimes. However, after hearing about what Robert had done at the psychiatric hospital, even the hardened criminals of Wakefield were filled with fear. Inside prison, Robert became infamous among inmates, who started calling him the Brain Eater. Within just a few weeks, tales of his horrifying acts spread like wildfire, turning him into a nightmarish legend in the prison world. Initially, authorities believed that with the highest level of security, Robert would no longer be able to cause trouble. But they had no idea that within less than a year, he would launch another terrifying killing spree, one so horrifying that most people would struggle to comprehend it. One of his targets was an inmate named Salnay, who was serving time for murdering his wife. Despite having heard about Robert's terrifying reputation, Salnay didn't believe the rumors. He dismissed them as exaggerated prison tales and paid little attention to the warnings. So when Robert casually invited him into his cell, Salnay didn't hesitate, completely unaware that he was walking straight to his death. The moment Salnay stepped inside, Robert pounced. He tied Salnay up before the man, even had a chance to react or defend himself. As Salnay attempted to scream for help, Robert quickly gagged him. Then, he took a makeshift weapon, a spoon he had sharpened into a blade, and brutally killed his victim. Once it was over, he dragged Salnay's body under his bed and hid it there. Robert didn't stop there. He slipped into the cell of another prisoner, Bill Roberts, a man convicted of sexually abusing a 7-year-old girl. Standing face to face with someone he despised, Robert didn't hesitate. He grabbed a makeshift weapon and plunged it straight into Bill's head, then slammed his skull against the wall repeatedly. The force was so brutal that it cracked Bill's skull wide open. After killing 2 men in a row, Robert didn't bother to flee. Instead, he calmly walked into the guard's office, placed his weapon on the table, and said in an eerily composed tone, "At the next roll call, you'll need to cross 2 names off your list." His words left the guard stunned. It wasn't until reports came in from other inmates that they realized Robert had indeed taken 2 lives. According to witnesses, he had actually planned to kill 7 people that day, but for some reason, he stopped after Salnay and Bill. The incident cemented Robert's reputation as one of Britain's most dangerous prisoners, earning him yet another life sentence. From that moment on, Wakefield Prison was shrouded in an eerie, chilling atmosphere. Stories of Robert spread like wildfire among the inmates, becoming a hot topic of conversation. Old-timers recounted the events to newcomers like a vivid horror movie, and Robert Maudsley's name became a dark legend in British history. To ensure the safety of other prisoners, the warden of Wakefield Prison spent £50,000 to construct a special cell in the basement just for Robert. It measured 5.5 meters by 4.5 meters and was entirely encased in bulletproof glass. Inside, there was only a concrete bed, a small table made of compressed cardboard, and a toilet bolted to the floor. Beyond basic necessities like food and hygiene, Robert had no other activities to occupy him. He was allowed 1 hour of yard time each day, but for the remaining 23 hours, he was confined to his isolated cell. A dedicated team of guards monitored him constantly, and whenever he moved, 6 guards accompanied him to ensure absolute security. Living in complete isolation for so long pushed Robert's psyche to the brink. He craved human interaction and connection. Over the years, he repeatedly requested to return to the general population cells to live among other inmates, but every request was denied. By March 2000, Robert decided to break his silence and wrote a letter to the prison warden. In it, he pleaded for better living conditions and asked for personal items like books, cassette tapes, or a sleeping bag to help him cope with the loneliness. He suggested being allowed to play video games, watch TV, or write letters to his family to pass the time. If none of those were possible, he requested a cyanide pill to end his life and put an end to his suffering. The prison, however, rejected all of Robert's requests. By the time he turned 68, on a Christmas season, he submitted another appeal, begging to be let out of his solitary cell for a chance to interact with the outside world. That case is still awaiting a decision. Robert had previously asked to rejoin the general population, but the prison staunchly refused to allow a dangerous killer like him to mingle with other inmates. They believed that after so much time in isolation, his behavior had become too unpredictable and uncontrollable, and they weren't willing to take the risk of releasing him into the general population. This time, not only did the prison deny Robert's request, but they also stripped him of his right to appeal altogether. That meant, barring some unforeseen event, he would spend the rest of his days in that isolated cell. Since 1973, Robert has been imprisoned for 52 years. Due to his prolonged isolation, he began forming bonds with the small creatures in his cell. People often saw him whispering in the corner of his room, seemingly talking to insects, cockroaches, rats, and other critters. Because of his dangerous nature, Robert hasn't had a haircut in over a decade. However, the story of this so-called cannibal captured the attention of the online community when it was covered by international media. Many internet users started asking questions. While keeping Robert in prison for life might be necessary, is isolating him in a solitary cell like this too cruel? Some even argued that a death sentence might be more humane than this form of confinement. Amid these debates, British authorities offered no comments. Yet, one can imagine that for a cold-blooded killer with violent instincts like Robert, isolating him might be the only way to ensure the safety of others. Showing leniency toward Robert could, in fact, be cruelty to everyone else. We can't wait for more tragedies to happen before feeling regret. By then, it would be far too late. Despite his severe psychological issues, Robert possesses an exceptional intellect and remarkable musical talent. Had it not been for the tragedies of his childhood, his life might not have ended so grimly. If his parents had treated him better, or even simply left him to grow up in the orphanage, perhaps this killer's fate could have been entirely different. The story of Robert Maudsley leaves us with much to reflect on about the roles of family, education, and society in shaping a person's life. What do you think about this case? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss together.
Hello there, heaven on earth. In the 1990s, this place was considered one of Beijing's most elite nightclubs. It was famous for its luxurious design and beautiful women, attracting numerous officials and wealthy businessmen seeking leisure. The most renowned hostess of Heaven on Earth was Liang Hailing, celebrated for her alluring voice, charm, and talent, rivaling some of the most famous personalities in China. At the time, just a meeting or a drink with her came at a high price, with a night by her side costing as much as 3.5 billion yuan. Her reputation spread across Southeast Asia, drawing affluent tycoons from all over the world to Beijing just for a chance to meet her. However, despite her wealth and beauty, a horrific tragedy eventually struck her. Hailing was originally from Hebei province. After graduating, she began working as a local accountant. We all know that accounting is complicated, exhausting, and doesn't always pay well. Seeing her peers frequenting vibrant urban districts, dressed in fashionable clothes and spending freely, she felt that she could no longer live as she was. So, she quit her job and moved to Beijing. At the time, she had only been to Beijing once, had no real work experience, and lacked formal qualifications, making it hard to find a well-paying job. Finally, through a friend's introduction, she became a hostess at Heaven on Earth. Back then, the establishment had just been purchased by its new owner, Jin, who had invested 40 million yuan into it and completely renovated it. With his sharp business acumen, Jin aimed to create not just a bar, but a high-end club catering to the elite class. Once the renovations were complete, Heaven on Earth immediately left an impression of opulence, grandeur, and splendor. It looked like a palace, perhaps even more lavish than a real palace. Spanning nearly the size of 2 football fields, it featured multiple functional areas such as KTV rooms, restaurants, steam baths, and a variety of luxurious amenities, including rooms for sleeping, dining, singing, and hot springs, all catering to the tastes of the elite. The remodeling alone cost almost 3 billion yuan, with all furnishings imported from Europe. Even the sound system in the dance room was valued at over 1 billion yuan, with Jin hiring a professional sound engineer from England to fine-tune it. Alongside its world-class facilities, the service here was also considered exceptional. Jin's hiring standards for servers and public relations girls were exceptionally rigorous. First, they were required to have a college degree, with higher educational backgrounds being preferred. Second, candidates needed to be between 18 and 28 years old, with heights ranging from 1.65 to 1.75 meters. Physical beauty was a basic requirement, but beyond that, they were expected to be fluent in Chinese and English, with some knowledge of Japanese and Korean. Yet these stringent qualifications were just the starting point. Selected public relations girls underwent extensive training and assessment, focusing on style, appearance, and intellectual sophistication. Through this process, these hostesses were completely transformed, excelling in charm, communication, and customer interaction. They could engage in any topic with clients from diverse backgrounds, speaking expertly on any subject the guests desired. With such high standards, their pay was equally substantial. At that time, the average monthly income of Beijing residents was around 1 million yuan, while an ordinary hostess at Heaven on Earth could earn over 3 million yuan each month, not to mention the earnings of the public relations girls. So, as soon as Ling learned about the job opportunity, she was surprised to find that simply drinking and singing could earn her a month's salary. This discovery thrilled her. People often say that ambition grows alongside desire, and this statement was particularly true for Ling. Initially, she was quite content with her income, but over time, she noticed that some girls who weren't as beautiful as her had significantly improved their living standards after becoming public relations hostesses. Jealousy began to stir within her. Eventually, unable to resist the allure, Ling decided to change her path. With her good looks, though not conventionally stunning, she possessed a charming presence, high emotional intelligence, and a knack for handling situations cleverly, which helped her quickly stand out among her peers. Naturally, her value began to rise accordingly. It was said that to have a conversation with Ling, The starting price was 5 million yuan. A drink with her cost 10 million yuan, and a song would set one back 20 million yuan. However, at that time, Ling still had a long way to go to reach the level of the club's senior hostesses. That was until a businessman from Taiwan entered the scene. Mr. Huang, the owner, was so eager to spend a romantic evening with Ling that he directly handed her a blank check, allowing her to write any amount. Without hesitation, Ling quoted an astronomical figure of 3.5 billion yuan. After their encounter, both enjoyed themselves thoroughly, and Ling realized she had become a well-known name. Ling became one of the four most famous hostesses at Heaven on Earth. Her fame spread throughout Southeast Asia, and wealthy businessmen flocked to Beijing just to catch a glimpse of her beauty. However, as Ling grew older, she also realized that her current job had no future. Consequently, she began planning her exit strategy. In 1999, Ling met a Chinese coal businessman. Mr. Mai visited her daily, paying her between 100 million and 500 million yuan. In less than a week, he spent nearly 2 billion yuan on her. What mattered most was that he was polite and did not make unreasonable demands. As time passed, Ling developed feelings for him, knowing he was worth tens of billions and was divorced. She soon dreamed of becoming the wife of a tycoon. When Mr. Mai invited her to join him, she accepted immediately. However, to her shock upon arriving in Taiyuan, this seemingly courteous businessman revealed his true predatory nature. He confined Ling in a villa and forced her to entertain his business partners. At that moment, Ling understood that his warm invitation to Taiyuan was merely a ploy to exploit her fame in exchange for resources from his connections. In a place like Taiyuan, known for its concentration of wealthy individuals, a flower from the capital was indeed enticing. After careful consideration, Ling managed to escape the villa by paying a significant amount to the maid. Unfortunately, she was soon recaptured by another powerful figure. Desperate, she called on Mr. Jin for help. Upon hearing the news, Jin promptly sought her rescue. He first approached a well-known local crime lord in Taiyuan for negotiations, but to his surprise, the lord flatly refused. Seeing that persuasion was futile, Jin had to send his representatives, leading a group to launch a direct assault on Taiyuan. After a fierce gunfight, Ling was freed. Following this incident, Ling realized that being self-sufficient was far better than relying on others. She began her own business, earning substantial money alongside her high salary from Heaven on Earth. Ling became a wealthy woman with a significant fortune, purchasing a home for her parents and a luxurious villa in Beijing. Her daily commute was in a high-end Mercedes supercar. Ling's extravagant villa exuded luxury and wealth, with multiple high-end cars parked in the driveway. Her food, clothing, and services were all top-tier brands. Shortly after, Ling became the envy and admiration of her colleagues. At this point, she could live well and considered leaving Heaven on Earth. However, no one could have anticipated that she would be mysteriously murdered in her home. On October 13th, 2005, in a luxury neighborhood of Beijing, security guard was conducting his regular patrol. This area was known as one of the city's most upscale districts, where influence was a common currency. As such, the security was exceptionally tight, with guards required to patrol every 30 minutes. On this day, one of the guards was walking along the street when suddenly, a patrolling dog began barking loudly as they passed a nearby villa. Concerned that the dog's barking might disturb the residents, Moy quickly pulled on its leash to silence it. However, the dog not only ignored his command but also struggled to escape his grip. The dog's behavior alarmed, prompting him to knock on the villa's door. He was familiar with the occupant, a beautiful young woman who typically left her home around 4 or 5 in the afternoon and returned in the early hours of the morning. Theoretically, she should have been home at that hour. But no matter how loudly knocked, there was no response. To make matters worse, he began to detect a faint smell of blood. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, he hastily called the security office. Shortly after, the security team leader and another guard arrived at the scene. After repeating the knocking and calling with no response, they forced the door open. What they found inside was horrifying. A woman lay in a pool of blood, her throat slashed open and her chest mutilated, with only 2 bloody holes remaining. The guards were horrified and quickly exited the room to report to the police. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough investigation of the crime scene and interviewed the neighbors and the security personnel. They confirmed that the victim was Ling, a well-known hostess from the Heavenly Lounge. Additionally, the police suspected that the murderer had tortured Ling before killing her, as her body bore numerous wounds. The police also discovered that all the wardrobes and drawers in the house had been turned inside out, and the living room floor was strewn with overturned tiles. It was clear that the assailant had been searching for something. Oddly enough, despite the chaos, no luxury items, watches, cars, or jewelry had been taken. Even Ling's nearly 50 billion yuan in her bank account remained untouched. This was a perplexing mystery. Through their investigation, the police learned that just days before Ling returned home, 2 men had visited her. The security guard recognized them as Ling's friends, allowing them access to the neighborhood. Security footage showed that just hours after their arrival, they left in a car. Who were these men? Could they be the killers? The police obtained information from the security staff that these 2 men frequently visited Ling's home, indicating a close relationship. They decided to investigate them further. After contacting Ling's sister, the police discovered that the shorter man captured on camera was Ling's ex-boyfriend, named Wang Dai Wei. Both Wei and Ling hailed from Hebei province. Initially, Wei had a steady income at the Heavenly Lounge, but Ling noticed him and began providing him with a monthly allowance of 150 million yuan. Unfortunately, Wei squandered this money on gambling and quickly accumulated debts totaling 2 billion yuan, forcing him to turn to Ling for help. After this incident, she warned him that if he continued gambling, they would part ways. Ling hoped Wei would change, but within a year, he amassed an additional 4 billion yuan in debt. Furious, she broke up with him just a month before her murder. Did Wei harbor resentment and plot to kill Ling? During the investigation, the police discovered a man's blood on a letter opener at the crime scene. After testing, they confirmed it was Wei's blood, making him the prime suspect. However, on the day Ling was attacked, Wei had boarded a flight with another man to Honduras in South America. The police confirmed that this man had been at the villa with Wei that day. Unfortunately, as Honduras had no diplomatic relations with China, the police were unable to extradite them for prosecution. The 2 men evaded capture for some time. In an unexpected turn of events, a year later, they were killed in a local gang conflict. The police lost all leads in Ling's case, which became one of the 10 most famous unsolved cases in the capital. To this day, there is still debate over whether Wei was the actual perpetrator in this case. Moreover, many conspiracy theories circulating online suggest that Wei was merely a hired gun, as Ling's home contained numerous valuable antique jewelry pieces, not to mention the 35 billion yuan in her bank account. If Wei intended to kill for money, why didn't he take these valuable items? Furthermore, Ling had no difficulty making money. She didn't need to sacrifice her life for it. Additionally, Wei and his cousin reportedly hadn't even completed high school. Without guidance or resources, it seems unlikely they could have conceived the idea of fleeing to Honduras. The sudden deaths of the 2 men suggest they were killed to eliminate any loose ends. This has led to speculation that Ling knew too much about certain business secrets that some powerful individuals wanted to keep hidden, ultimately resulting in her murder. Others argue that Ling was simply too beloved, making her a victim in a power struggle among the elite. After Ling's death, the Heavenly Lounge also came under scrutiny. 5 years later, the club was shut down, marking the end of what was once a vibrant hotspot. In the world of bars, These women often craft perfect images to attract customers with their beauty and charm. However, behind the glitz and glamour, they frequently face temptations, pressures, and unstable lives. Many girls find it difficult to escape the dark vortex of this lifestyle, trapped in a social stratum rife with sacrifices and injustices. They deserve to be recognized and respected, and we must understand that behind the dim lights, there are hearts yearning for a better life. And that concludes today's case. What are your thoughts? Please leave your comments below this video. If you enjoyed it, support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more intriguing cases to come. Thank you and goodbye.